They were born on a night when the swamp howled like something wounded, and the midwife swore the wind stopped moving the moment their first cry rose into the humid Mississippi air. Two identical girls, small as sparrows and quiet as breath after that first scream. Their mother, Lila, a field slave on a cotton plantation outside Natchez, looked at them with an expression that the overseer later described as fear dressed like love. No one understood what she meant when she whispered, "Lord help us, they came together, and together they will be taken." Plantation births were rarely noticed, but these twins drew attention from the moment they opened their eyes. For reasons no one could explain, the girls never cried after that first night. Not once. Not for hunger, not for pain, not even when the overseer's whip cracked too close to their mother's legs as she worked the field with them wrapped on her back. They would only stare, wide-eyed, as if silently studying everything around them. People on the plantation began murmuring, calling them the quiet pair, and later, the mirror sisters, because even the smallest expression on one face appeared instantly on the other. If one tilted her head, the other mirrored it. If one smiled, the second smiled a heartbeat later. And if one looked frightened, both sets of eyes darkened with the same sudden shadow. The enslaved people noticed these things. The overseers noticed too, but explained it away as coincidence or childish mimicry. Yet mimicry didn't explain the other things. By the time they could walk, the twins had an ability that made even the most hardened field hands uneasy. They seemed to know when someone was sick before symptoms appeared. They would quietly walk up to a person, lay their tiny palms on the back of that person's hand, and then simply walk away. Within days, fever or cough or infection would follow. They also seemed to sense when arguments were about to erupt. Two men would be on opposite sides of a field, voices rising, tempers boiling, and the twins would simply appear, standing silently between them, looking up with their steady eyes. The argument always dissolved. People began whispering that the sisters had sight beyond the ordinary. But no one dared say it too loudly. In Mississippi, anything that frightened the white owners became dangerous for everyone. As the twins grew older, their bond deepened into something eerie. They never spoke to each other out loud. Not once. They spoke to others, simple words, quiet voices, but between themselves there was only silence and perfect understanding. They could sit across a room and react to something only one of them had seen. They knew when the other was hurt even if miles apart. They refused to sleep unless their beds touched. Their mother feared more than anyone. Some nights, Lila would shake them awake, her breath trembling as she checked they were still alive. She told no one the truth she believed. The girls had come into the world with something the world was not meant to hold. And yet the girls themselves were gentle, kind, and strangely observant. They helped the older women grind herbs. They learned the sound of every animal in the woods. They watched the sky the way other children watched toys. But they carried a stillness inside them that felt older than their years. Life on the plantation, cruel and grinding as it was, settled into a rhythm, until the summer the new owner arrived. His name was Silas Thorne, a man whose wealth came from more cruelty than cotton. He had the look of someone who enjoyed collecting things, rare coins, exotic animals, people he believed were unusual enough to be remarkable. The moment he heard whispers about the strange twin girls, something inside him sharpened like a blade. He summoned them. The twins, now 11 years old, walked into the big house with bare feet dusted in red earth. They looked at him with the same steady, unreadable gaze. Silas Thorne smiled in a way that made even the servants shift nervously. He spoke softly at first, asking them their names. "Ada," the first said. "Aren," the second whispered. Simple, small voices. Nothing threatening. Then he began testing them. He dropped a silver spoon on one side of the room. Both girls turned their heads before it hit the floor. He clapped suddenly behind them. Either flinched. He asked one girl a question, then watched the other answer it at the same time, word for word. When he asked them to walk apart, far apart, one inside the house and one outside, he waited until they could no longer see each other. Then he struck Ada's hand with a cane. Aren outside screamed. That was the moment he knew, whatever tied them together wasn't ordinary. And to him, that made them valuable. He didn't want field hands. He wanted curiosities. From that day on, the twins were forbidden to return to the fields. They were kept in a separate cabin closer to the big house, watched constantly, studied constantly. Their mother was allowed to see them only once a week. She would hold their faces in her hands and whisper prayers over them while the overseer tapped his boot outside, waiting for the visit to end. Silas Thorne began inviting guests, local landowners, doctors, traveling preachers, to observe the girls. He made them perform strange demonstrations. He would blindfold one and hold up fingers behind the other. Both would answer correctly. He would ask one to listen to the ticking of a pocket watch while the other sat a room away. Both heard it. The guests murmured, confused, intrigued, unsettled. The twins never resisted. They only held each other's hands, tightly, silently, as if every moment they were together was a moment they were fighting not to be torn apart. But the more people whispered about them, the more dangerous their existence became. Rumors traveled fast in Mississippi, especially rumors about something unnatural among the enslaved. One night the girls woke up to find their mother standing over their bed, tears streaming silently down her face. She pressed her trembling hands to their cheeks. "You must stay together," she whispered. "No matter what happens. Promise me." They promised. Seconds later, heavy boots approached the door. Someone was coming for them. Someone who believed the girls' gift was not a miracle, but a threat. And that night, everything began to unravel. The door burst open with a violence that made the wooden frame shudder. Lila instinctively pulled both girls behind her, spreading her arms as if her small body could shield them from the men who filled the doorway. Torches flickered behind them, casting long shadows that danced like jaws on the cabin walls. Silas Thorne stepped inside last. His coat was buttoned tight despite the humid night, and his expression, calm, almost polite, felt more dangerous than the guns the overseers carried. He didn't look at Lila. His eyes went straight to the twins, huddled behind her like frightened deer. "It's time," he said. Lila shook her head. "They're children," she whispered. "You can't." Thorne motioned, and one of the overseers seized her by the arms. Ada and Aren cried out for their mother, clinging to her skirts, their small hands desperate and shaking. But the men pried them off, holding the twins apart as they kicked and reached for each other. The instant their hands lost contact, something strange happened. A ringing sound filled the air, a sharp, metallic hum that seemed to come from nowhere. Ada clutched her chest. Aren gasped as if the breath had been knocked out of her. The room pulsed with tension, like the air before lightning strikes. Even the overseers froze, uncertain. Ada screamed first. Aren screamed second. The screams were identical, perfectly synchronized, 2 notes struck from the same instrument. The torches flickered violently, one nearly going out. The vibrations in the air grew louder, sharper, until even Thorne stepped back. "Stop," he ordered. "Bring them together." The men hesitated, but when they let the girls touch hands again, the sound vanished instantly. The twins collapsed into each other's arms, shaking, their breaths ragged and uneven. The overseers exchanged uneasy glances. Thorne looked at them with something like hunger. "Do you see?" he murmured. "It's not natural. They cannot be separated. If we find how their bond works, imagine what else we might discover." He nodded to his men. "Bring them." The girls were dragged from the cabin, their mother screaming behind them, her voice swallowed by the night as they faded toward the big house. 4 days after that, no one saw the twins. The enslaved workers whispered in the fields, wondering if the girls were still alive. Some said they heard crying from the cellar below the mansion. Others said they'd seen Silas Thorne bringing in doctors from New Orleans, men with leather bags and cold, curious eyes. The truth was far worse. The twins had been taken to a room with brick walls and a single cot. They were kept there together, always touching, always watched. Every morning, Thorne and his hired physician, Dr. Mallory, performed tests on them. Not violent ones at first, but invasive in other ways. Endless questions. Endless observation. Endless attempts to separate them even for a second. Whenever they were pulled apart, the same strange reaction occurred. Aren would gasp. Ada's knees would buckle. The air would vibrate with that same metallic ringing, strong enough to make the lamps on the walls tremble. Once, a glass beaker on a nearby table shattered into dust. Dr. Mallory called it sympathetic resonance. Thorn called it a miracle. But Ada and Aren began calling it the pain. Something about being forced apart damaged them. It left them exhausted, trembling, and feverish. Their bond, the invisible thread that tied their minds and bodies, reacted violently every time someone tried to stretch or cut it. After the first week, Thorn ordered something new. He wanted to test distance. The girls sensed danger before the men even entered their room that morning. Their fingers gripped each other tighter than they ever had. When the overseers reached for them, the twins fought with an energy that shocked everyone, the kind of wild, frantic strength that comes only from terror. Ada bit an overseer's wrist so hard he screamed. Aren kicked another man in the stomach. They twisted, clawed, thrashed. But the men were larger. They pried them apart. Aren was carried out of the room, kicking and sobbing, her face white as winter. Ada was held down on the cot, her wrists strapped to the wood. As soon as Aren disappeared around the corner of the hallway, Ada's body arched off the bed. Her eyes rolled back. The ringing sound erupted again, 3 times louder than before. Dr. Mallory pressed his hands to his ears. Thorn staggered back. The lamps blew out. The cot trembled violently beneath Ada's body, shaking as if something inside her was trying to escape. "Get the other one!" Mallory yelled. "Bring her back!" But Aren, carried toward the far end of the mansion, began to scream, a scream so sharp it felt like it traveled through the walls, through the floorboards, through the air itself. The overseer holding her lost his grip, dropping her to her knees. She crawled desperately toward the direction she believed her sister was in, sobbing, choking for breath. "Please!" she whispered to no one. "She can't breathe." The overseer grabbed her again, dragging her further. In the cellar, Ada's body convulsed so violently that the leather straps began to tear. Mallory shouted again. "Bring them together now!" But the overseer carrying Aren hesitated. He was sweating, shaking, his face white with fear. "Sir," he said hoarsely, "when they're apart, something's wrong with the whole damn house." Before Thorn could respond, a sound echoed from the corridor, a rupturing, cracking noise. Plaster fell from the ceiling. A lantern on the wall shattered in a burst of sparks. The overseers panicked. Thorn finally shouted, "Bring her back!" Aren was hauled back toward the cellar at a run. As she neared the room, the ringing grew louder, sharper, until every man clamped his hands over his ears. When they flung the door open and shoved her inside, she lunged at Ada with a cry so desperate it barely sounded human. Their hands met. The world went suddenly, terrifyingly silent. Ada's convulsions stopped. Aren collapsed on top of her. The lamps flickered back to life. The ringing dissolved into a low, exhausted hum. Thorn looked at the 2 girls curled together on the cot, their breaths shallow, their faces pale. It was clear now, whatever connected them was not just emotional. It was physical, biological, maybe even something more. And Thorn had no intention of stopping. But deep beneath his curiosity, a fear had begun to grow, because whatever force tied these 2 children together responded to separation with power. And power, especially power in the hands of enslaved people, was something Mississippi feared more than anything. He needed to understand their bond. Or break it. By the end of that long, violent summer, the plantation was no longer the same. People whispered more carefully. Doors stayed bolted at night. The enslaved workers avoided the big house entirely, crossing themselves quietly whenever they passed near the cellar door. It wasn't the girls they feared. It was what happened when the girls were hurt. Word of the enslaved twins with the screaming bond had begun spreading far beyond Natchez. Men who dealt in superstition, science, and cruelty came riding in with letters of introduction, eager to see the phenomenon for themselves. Some wanted to buy the girls. Others wanted to study them. A few, cloaked in the language of religion, claimed they wanted to cure them. But Silas Thorne refused them all. "They're mine," he said. "And no one understands them like I do." The truth was, Thorne didn't understand them at all. And that terrified him. One night, after the last visitor had finally left, Dr. Mallory approached Thorne with a proposal. The girls were growing weaker from the constant testing. Their breathing was becoming shallow. Their eyes had lost the spark they once carried. The resonance that rippled through the air when they were separated seemed to tear something inside them every single time. "We need to stop," Mallory warned. "Their bodies are linked in a way I can't explain. If one dies..." Thorne cut him off. "I don't want them to die. I want them to reveal what they are." Mallory stared at him for a long moment. "You can't treat children like instruments." Thorne turned away. "These children," he said coldly, "are the closest thing to a miracle I've ever owned." Mallory realized then that Thorne would never stop. And that meant only one thing: someone had to free the twins, or the testing would kill them. The opportunity came sooner than he expected. A hurricane swept across Mississippi that September, one of the worst the region had seen in decades. The sky darkened until noon looked like night. Winds tore through the fields, ripping crops from their roots. Shingles flew from rooftops like cards. By evening, the river had risen so high it swallowed the lower pasture. The enslaved workers prayed in their cabins while the big house groaned under the weight of the storm. Doors slammed. Windows shattered. Even the animals thrashed in fear. But nothing was as frightening as the moment lightning struck the magnolia tree outside the mansion, exploding it into 1,000 burning splinters. The tree had stood for generations, older than the house, older than the fields. Its fall shook the ground so violently that the cellar door flew open. Dr. Mallory took this as a sign. He grabbed a lantern and ran down the steps. Ada and Aren were huddled in a corner, their arms wrapped so tightly around each other it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. They were terrified, but awake. Mallory dropped to his knees beside them. "You must come with me," he said. "Now." The twins looked at each other, then at him. Their faces were pale, sickly, but their eyes carried a strange, exhausted determination. They nodded. Mallory lifted Ada in his arms while Aren clung to his coat, refusing to let go of her sister's hand. The cellar shook as wind battered the mansion. Rafters creaked. Water seeped under the door. There was no time. He hurried them through the servants' corridor, out the back of the mansion, and toward the woods. Rain lashed at them in sheets. The lantern blew out almost immediately, leaving only flashes of lightning to show the path. Behind them, the plantation roared with chaos, shouting voices, breaking fences, animals running loose. But Mallory pushed forward. Aren stumbled. Ada cried out. They were too weak. He couldn't carry them both. Not in this storm. "We're almost there," he whispered. "Just a little further." But the wind wasn't the only thing following them. From behind the stable, a dark figure emerged, coat whipping, boots splashing through the mud. Silas Thorne. He carried no lantern, no weapon. He didn't need one. His voice alone was sharp enough. "Mallory!" he shouted. "Put them down!" The twins froze. Mallory tightened his grip on Ada's shoulders. Thorne stepped closer. "Do you have any idea what they are?" he demanded. "What they could become?" Mallory shook his head. "They're children, Silas. Not property. Not experiments. Children who can shake a house apart," Thorne snapped. "Children who can sense each other across walls. Children who defy every law of nature." He pointed at them, rain running down his face like sweat. "They are more than human. And they belong to me." A massive thunderclap boomed overhead, drowning out the last of his words. Aren, shaking violently, clung to Ada's hand. Something was happening inside them, something different. Their breaths synchronized, rising and falling in perfect rhythm. Their pupils dilated. Their fingers tightened. Mallory felt the change immediately. "What's happening?" he whispered. Ada's voice trembled. He's trying to take us again, Aren added. But we won't let him. A ringing began, soft at first, almost delicate. But Thorn recognized it instantly. His eyes widened. No, he breathed. Don't you dare. Mallory stepped between him and the girls. Stop, he said. You're killing them. No, Thorn shouted. They're doing it themselves. The ringing grew louder, vibrating through the ground, through the trees, through the wet Mississippi air. Leaves trembled. Raindrops flickered mid-fall. The twins' hair whipped around them like a dark halo. Thunder cracked. Lightning struck the riverbank a few yards away, exploding water into a glowing mist. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the sound collapsed into silence. Ada and Aren fell to their knees. Thorn staggered back. Mallory knelt beside the girls. Are you hurt? He whispered. Ada shook her head. Not hurt, she said softly. Just finished. Aren leaned into her. We chose. Mallory didn't understand. But Thorn did. You broke it, he whispered. You weakened your bond. Ada looked up at him, eyes dark and steady. No, she said. We strengthened our choice. Their hands were still touching. But their bodies no longer shook. Their breath no longer fractured. Their connection was still there, but different. Calmer. Controlled. Owned by them, not by anything else. The storm raged around them, but its fury no longer mattered. Silas Thorn had lost. And the twins were free. Mallory helped them into the woods, where the enslaved community, who had seen the lanterns and heard the strange thunder, waited in terrified silence. When they saw the girls alive, the crowd parted. Some cried. Some prayed. Some simply nodded, understanding that they were witnessing something sacred, something that would never be explained in any book or record. Ada and Aren survived long enough to reach safety across the river, hidden by people who risked everything to protect them. And though history never recorded their names, whispers of the Mirror Sisters lived on in Mississippi's shadows for generations. A story never fully understood. A bond never broken. A secret no one could ever explain. If you want more forgotten stories like this, stories buried in silence, stories history tried to erase, make sure to subscribe to The Forgotten Cell, where the past still breathes, and still haunts.